And welcome back into another episode of Tribal Council Chat. We are your hosts, as always. My name is Bruce Heller,
My name's Brett Parnell.
and let's dip our torches in the fire and get started. So, we have a really fun episode for you guys this week. We're going to be talking about duos, which there have been a lot of fun duos and pairs throughout the show's history, but we each picked five, and I blended those five together kind of recently. So these aren't necessarily in any order. So
Yeah.
without further ado,
And just to confirm for the audience, this is our five favorites on our list. But in before we give you our number ones, we're gonna be doing a sort of honorable mention section that will cover some of the
yeah.
duos of all time in the
So
history of the game.
admittedly, I was having trouble ordering mine, so I just kind of picked five that I want. One like mine aren't in order, five to one. They're just kind of. I just you sent me five names. I had five names. I blended everything together. So first on deck on the list we created is one of yours, and that is Rob and Sean from Marquesas.
Yeah, so we're going back to one of the first original seasons, season four, Survivor Marquez. And while I'm sure you're expecting to see Rob with somebody else podcast, but what I really wanted to talk about is the Rob and Sean duo. Personally, I always find this a very fascinating one. It's kind of a duo that you'd almost expect to never happen. Two young guys on a tribe, one from Boston, one from Upper Manhattan, right near Yankee Stadium. You just don't see that in America, and it was so neat to see. In my mind, you have Rob making everybody laugh with the news. You have Sean in the season comparing. One day he's comparing Sarah to Princess Cleopatra of Egypt. A couple weeks later, he doesn't want to work. And it was just a really fun group to watch, especially with the dynamic of these two and how they approach the game compared to the other players on their tribe. What are your thoughts about them, Bruce?
Yeah, they were a really fun duo. I remember those news updates, like you said. I think I saw a picture Rob posted recently, the two of them hanging out. So that's cool. They're
Yeah,
still friends to this day, but they definitely brought the humor early on in Marquesas and didn't get to see Rob go super deep into the game, but in his first season, but what we saw was entertaining. And then we see Sean go deeper and have a second duo with him and Vesepia. So,
which duo All Stars?
do what? Sorry, you cut out.
Sean would have been put.
Okay. So, our next duo on the list is one from mine, which is going even farther back than Brett's from Marquesas. We've got Roger and Elizabeth from season two, the Australian Outback. And she was my favorite of the season anyway. Just she's super likable on the show to me and fun to watch. But her and Roger just had this really cool like father daughter vibe it seemed, and they really looked out for each other even as their original tribe dwindled around them, and it was just them versus the Oga cores. So really fun bond for me.
It was. And for them to make it as far as they did, knowing like if one of them could have snuck through and then they're on day 39, it's an easy win.
Oh yeah, if either of those two makes the end, they win.
Yeah.
So and then
And
we kind of saw a very similar dynamic with Pascal and Nalia 2 seasons later in Marquesas. So just a really cool type of relationship, one you don't see very often with survivor duos with that age
no,
gap.
especially not where it's just so tempting as the game goes along that the younger people tend to just get rid of that older person early, and maybe it's just because of a change in how the game works. But you look at someone like Roger with so much experience that he clearly had a lot to offer the Kucha tribe that they wouldn't have had they him and Elizabeth not come together and got rid of thinking back to like some of the other players earlier, like
Yeah, and I feel
Kimmy
like,
at the time or Deb.
and we talked about this a little bit when we did player profiles, and you talked about Rudy, but I feel like a lot of times when there's these age gaps, it causes friction. We saw Stacy, one of the younger players, wanting to take out Rudy in Borneo. And part of their differences, I think, was just a generational gap. But with
Yeah,
Roger and Elizabeth, we see that the old and the young can work together and have that really tight duo looking after each other like family. So, really great duo. That's my favorite season from the first 10. So,
nice.
the next one on our list
Now we
is
will,
one of yours, and that is
yeah.
Danny McCrae and Sydney from 41. Take it
So
away.
yeah, we start with two really old school duos, and now I'm going straight to the new era. Um, I just love this relationship. As you know, Sydney was one of my favorite players in that season. So was Danny.
Yeah.
Um, in Sydney's case, I was drawn to cheering for her early on because we both have that same travel background. Danny was great to see because, especially, like, we don't see pro athletes know the game the way that he does.
Yeah.
Usually, when we get one, and it's like the on there because they were recruited, not because they really know Survivor
Yeah.
and therefore are going to go pretty quick. Denny was totally different. And with these two coming together and really being that athletic male and athletic female and playing such a strong physical game on the tribe was very interesting to see. It really brought, I think, the two of them together more in opposition to players like Heather or Erica. That would have been interesting to see what would have happened if they did have to go to tribal council. Unfortunately, as we all know, there's this hourglass thing, and I mean, we won't go into that. I could do a whole episode on it, but if you put yourself in Denny's position at that point, you know it's going to be one of the top duos of all time if you're willing to get in an argument with Popes that almost goes to quitting over watching your ally be sent home in that fashion.
Yeah. And two things. You and I did a Zoom call with Sydney one time, and she was so nice to both of us.
Oh, absolutely.
And then not just on Survivor, but with very two separate challenge seasons we've seen him on now. Danny just is so likable to me. I love Danny. He just seems like such a cool guy, such a nice guy. Seemed to get along with everyone on challenge world championships other than his own partner, but this isn't a challenge podcast, so that's a conversation for another show, I guess. But
Sure, it's going to come up again in a few weeks when we have one of my favorites going back on that show.
so you did mention something about it would have been curious if Luvu had gone to tribal pre-merge. I feel like in that case it might have been Erica, because from what I remember, they were almost gonna throw a challenge to take her out pre-merge and decided not to. So
Absolutely.
if they do
And
have
with
to go to tribal, she seems like the likely one to go home just because of the game hadn't flipped yet. Erica hadn't found the footing she eventually found. And props to her playing the hand she was dealt. She did great after the hourglass, but it,
absolutely.
it's kind of the Chris Underwood thing. Like they
Yeah.
did do a good job with what they had, but it's
You
still,
can't fault them for playing the hand that they were dealt,
you know,
even if it was unfair in my mind.
I do give her more credit than Underwood though, just because she technically didn't get voted out. So
True. So now we'll move on to yours. And with this, I'll let you do your intro, but we have one of probably the most well known and well liked duos of all time, especially in the original seasons.
yeah, so not quite as old school as the first two, but I'm still going back to old school Survivor towards the very end of what I define as the old school era. and I am going with JT and Steven Fishback from Token Cheens, which, and you can make an argument if we ever do a episode on trios also, if you count Taj, then the three of them would be a trio also, but JT and Steven just really ran Token Cheens from the beginning, somehow figured out
Really
a
be a
way.
theme for an episode coming up in the future.
They somehow figured out a way to deal with Coach and make him bearable. Oh, are you still there? Yep.
I hear my link went out, so
No, you're fine. They found a way to use Coach and all of his coachness to their advantage. Steven was Fish was the strategic mastermind, and JT had the social game and the likability to bring people in and get people to want to work with them. So just such a fantastic duo.
yeah, I agree. Um, I'm one of those people that probably would have voted for Steven. I think his strategic game was so impressive and really under-recognized in this final tribal council. No, that takes nothing away from JT. He was a dominant player.
Yeah,
Watching this duo, especially in how they operated, like when Coach goes to exile right before he's eventually taken out, that was one of the best episodes of all time. And
yeah,
it's one I think we could even maybe go back sometime and watch the Motu approach and do a whole podcast on it because it's easily in the top 5 episodes in the whole franchise.
yeah. Coach's trip to exile is just like, if you took the essence of Coach and just in its purest form, it's his trip to exile. So that whole episode is great. And
Yeah.
I agree with what you said. Steven's social game is pretty underrated because of who he was sitting next to, but he made the mistake of at Final Tribal saying that he did consider taking JT out at 3 had he won and had thought about that. And JT ran with that and was throwing that back at him and playing the loyalty card the whole Final Tribal, and that ultimately cost him. So, really fantastic duo. So, I think you've got one next that's going to be pretty fun to talk about.
This is next when we bring one of the greatest players of all time into the discussion, which is Pavudi Shallow. But I will not talk about her relationship with your favorite player, Amanda. I am going to put her on the list with, in my opinion, her best duo, which is Danielle DiLorenzo in Heroes versus Villains.
Mm-hmm.
For those of you who just watched the Australian Heroes versus Villains, this is Shawnee and Liz sort of in a relationship with George. How the Spice Girls broke into Shiz. This was it. That basic alliance on the American version a decade and a half ago.
Yeah. It's
Where
funny
the
how
two of them,
parallel those two seasons are.
oh, it was so, especially for having the same theme. It was very neat to see. But if we go back, it was like both ladies thought had Russell thinking that he was in an alliance with them when the two of them are popping off in an immunity in rewards and hiding immunity idol clues from Russell, but sharing them with each other. That is
Yeah.
such a great one of the greatest clips in the show, one of the greatest moments surrounding the whole idea of the hidden idol at its heyday. And then what Pavudi then goes and does with that same idol after is just
Yeah.
amazing television.
Well, and the scene
Really,
where they go off on their own at the reward and try to figure out what to do with the idol clue is just hysterical. There's a funny line in there.
yeah. If you haven't watched it, go watch it.
But yeah, and then Russell being admittedly as irritating as he can be intuitive, picked up on it like George did in Australian
Yeah,
Survivor. And unfortunately he ends up taking Danielle out, which was a like, I get where he was coming from because you want to secure your alliances and make sure your people are your people, not someone else's. But he went about it in such a terrible way from a jury management perspective that really sank him also.
Well, going about things in a terrible jury management perspective is about how to sum up Russell in every season he's played.
That's the only thing he's missing. If he had just been a teensy bit better, not even good, just not awful, he would have won one of those seasons, I feel like.
Yeah. And now for your third,
Yep.
feel free to take it away. Go ahead.
So
I
I'm
think we're going to one
finally
of your favorite players of all time here.
yep, I'm finally dipping into a new school one with my favorite winner, Natalie Anderson. And this is someone she was a duo with on her first season, and then again on Winners at War with her and Jeremy Collins. And I believe she's a godparent of his kids or something like that. Like they're super
So,
tight outside the game to this day. Love seeing them work together. As much as I love seeing them play together, I wish they wouldn't have been on the same tribe on to start on Winners at War. That kind of put a target on both of them to
yeah.
start off with.
I
But
always thought like you that season would have just been perfect if Natalie and Sarah switch places.
yeah, but you see them in San Juan del Sur. Jeremy gets taken out early post merge because they realize he's such a threat. Natalie takes that as motivation, more motivation, because she was already motivated by her sister, and goes on to
Yeah.
just dominate completely and win the thing. Jeremy comes back on second chances and just rolls over everyone. Jeremy was awesome in his second season. Then they come back for Winners at War, and it's exciting. And unfortunately, they get put on the same tribe, and everyone knows how close they are. So unfortunately, it didn't have too great of an ending for them in game, but obviously they're still super close out of game. So that's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think one really neat aspect of this duo, especially being in a blood versus water season, is that the they both become two of the greatest players in the history of the game, only
Mm-hmm.
to watch their loved ones walk out of that path down from tribal first and second in their season.
Yeah. Okay, so your next one is not only new school, but even newer than that. It's another new era duo.
Now we're
So,
going right back to the new era. I really, despite all this era's criticisms, one thing I have to say, credit out there to Jeff Probst, to Jesse, to everyone on their team. Casting has been amazing from
mm-hmm.
41 up to the president, and I hope it keeps going.
Yeah,
You're just seeing so many of these new people come onto the show who, like myself, as someone who's applying, have basically wanted this ever since they were kids, and their dream is coming true. They're not trying to formulate an acting career or Instagram or other shows or whatever. It's like they have spent their whole childhood wanting to be on Survivor.
yeah. And with
Go ahead.
your duo here is Lindsay and Omer, right?
Yes, it is Lindsay and Omar. Um, this duo is a bit unique. First of all, shout out to Oma representing Ontario on Survivor, my home province. Love it. What I really love about this duo is I just feel like it was the duo we needed as a country and as a Survivor audience. Now it's not just in the US, but around the world, Canada, Western Europe, for that specific time period. Like you said, we're not a challenge podcast. I know we're not a political podcast either. But at the same time, what really touched me with this duo is that we have to go back and remember that this season was filmed only a couple of months after the United States helped negotiate the Abraham Accords, which is the recognition of normal international relations and a peace treaty between the state of Israel and the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco. So seeing that moment that we got on the island of the whole tribe being interested in Omar's background and his Muslim faith and his prayer and asking him questions, and then Jonathan says, "You can ask me about Christianity," and Lindsay throws in that remark, "Don't ask me anything, I'm a bad Jew." I was laughing my head off in
Yeah.
that moment. And it was just like, in my mind, especially with what just happened in the world and that historic moment that meant so much to so many people, both of Jewish background and of Islamic background, it was like this was those two communities that have so much history coming together in mainstream reality television. And as someone that's really involved in issues affecting that very complex part of the world in the Middle East, it was so amazing to watch in primetime TV right after what just happened a few months before.
Yeah. And you mentioning that scene, the first thing that comes to my mind is actually from Island of the Idols. And as dark as that season got, for reasons that are obvious, there was a really one of my favorite scenes and touching scenes was the do rag conversation with Jack
Yeah.
and Jamal. And so them asking questions of Omar about his faith and asking Jonathan questions about his faith, kind of, and genuinely wanting to learn and wanting to be better, reminded me of Jack and Jamal from 39 a little bit.
Oh, absolutely. And even throw Lindsay in there, she might have kind of joked about it, but it's like, as someone myself who does a lot of work with the Jewish community, there is that issue in the community of how different sects who actually follow the Torah as it was originally written versus those living in more of the modern world. And to see that come together as part of it was great too.
Yeah, and I will say I love both Lindsay and Omer as players. Omer kind of fits into this archetype that's in my head. I don't really feel like, not that no one comes to my mind for this on 44, but the first three New Era seasons, I kind of group Ricard from 41, Omer, and Jesse from 43 all into the same character type,
Mhm.
that really dominant player, really great strategically, has no ability to manage threat level. And so when we see these players get to the round where they're gone, you know they're gone. You know that they're not going to get to the end. But if they do, all three of them would have won easily.
People are talking about it online. Who knows if any of this is coming from Jeff or from any other executive producers? But man, if we can get a second chance to, Lindsay and Oma both need to be there.
Yeah. But is there anyone that comes to your mind for that kind of character type from 44? Because no one came to my mind.
44, yeah. Not really. I mean, Yam Yam would have if they took him out and he won the game. So
Yeah.
credit to him.
But Ricard, Omer, Jesse, just all incredible players if you take managing your threat level out of the equation.
Yeah. So let's
So,
go to yours now. And I think we are now going to another couple of your favorite players this time.
yeah, so my two favorite players of all time, as I've said before, are Kelly Wentworth and Amanda Kimmel, who each of them have a few duos they could be a part of. So I limited myself to one of each, one for each, so so that I could cover more players. And this is my Kelly duo, and it's her and Lauren O'Connell from 38, who, if you follow either of them on social media, they're still best friends in real life. Um, at the marooning in 38, we see Lauren get starstruck when Kelly arrives because that's one of her favorite players. So getting to see Lauren be this fan who then gets to align with her one of her favorite players ever, and that's obviously translated to years later they're still some of each other's best friends and hanging out and throwing watch parties, and I just love these two as a pair.
Yeah, I love this one too, especially like everyone in the audience can relate to it too, because I'm sure every Survivor fan has somebody that they would just be like, I want to align with that person if there's ever a captain season. And for Lauren, probably to be the first person we've seen, I think the only person we've seen to really live that experience of genuinely coming on to a season and finding out that she was on a tribe with her favorite player of all time.
Yeah, that'd
is
be
such
awesome.
a unique moment to see. Like you say, they're still friends now. I mean, what could have been different if it wasn't for War Dog screwing it all up?
And it wasn't even a bad move. Like it was a
No,
good move. It was just too soon.
exactly.
Like if he pulls that same trigger the next round or 2 rounds later, it's perfect. But he showed his threat level and showed how good he was too
And
soon. And
they
it
sent him
changed the
home
game.
next.
I mean,
Lauren was obviously not going to work with him after that. And
yeah, well, she also gave an idol to Chris Underwood that she didn't have to. So they both kind of messed their own games up a little bit.
yeah,
So then next one is kind of for you what Kelly and Lauren as a pair was for me.
yeah. Before we go to that list, though, let's go into some like let's pick two each that we think were like in the best duos of all time and do that honorable mention, and then we'll have our number ones right after.
Okay, so we're talking about best right now.
So now just give a couple of like big name duos that we can talk about that you didn't make it onto your list.
So I didn't put this one on my list because I thought you would, but I mean we can't talk duos without Rob and Amber. That's kind of the
Absolutely.
biggest one in the history of the show. Not only like watching them not only fall in love but play the game together, dominate together throughout All Stars, and then all these years later they're still married. They're like they won more than just the game there.
Yeah.
So that's
And then you come back for winners at war.
yeah. And then I believe Probst said Amber was who he thought was the biggest get because he thought he didn't have any chance of getting her to come on. So
Yeah, absolutely. And then it was, and then like even with that season, you still see this such a powerful relationship when Rob walks over to Pove in the morning and is just like, I got a fire token. And you could tell he knew what that meant.
yeah,
And
I
like
love
Pove
yeah,
didn't even know right away. It took her a few seconds for it to sit in. But with Rob, it was just like instantly he knew Amber was in trouble on the edge of extinction.
yeah. And two things I want to say about Winners at War. We talked about Natalie and Jeremy's relationship and the fact that they started on the same tribe, put a target on both of them. Rob and Amber are such a good duo and are so known that they started on separate tribes and it still gave them that same target that Natalie and Jeremy both had.
As Adam Klein said, there's people in this game who are married.
Yeah. And then definitely I feel like if we're talking duo, like this is the first couple of Survivor here. Like that's the royalty pair right there.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the ones I want to bring up in this section that I think is probably like second to that pair in terms of just recognizability as a duo is Cops R Us, Tony and
Yeah.
Sarah. I find this duo so fascinating because it's like even to this day, Tony goes the season Sarah wins. Tony goes out second. They don't play together at all.
Yeah.
The 2 seasons that they play together, Tony will backstab Sarah. Once in the merge boot of Kagian, and then again, even though they make up with the Sophie boot.
Yeah.
And those this relationship is through the background in law enforcement is still able to come back together and reunify and eventually work its way to the end. I'm not sure if Tony or Sarah win the game or even get to the final four if after that big move that Tony makes to get rid of Sophie if they break into two.
Yeah. And before we each share our last pairs off of our list, talking I not this isn't really a duo because they weren't really like aligned together as that type duo. But Colby and Jerry playing on a tribe together across 3 separate seasons, I feel like
Yeah.
deserves some sort of mention here. Like I said, not really a duo, but feels like it
Only
deserves
deserves
a
some
mention.
mention. I think they might come up in a future episode, this pair.
Yeah. Okay. And so we each have one left. You want
For
to take?
number ones before we play Ally Blindside First Boot. My number one duo comes from the Gondol tribe in Survivor Korong, and it's my favorite player of all time, Michelle Fitzgerald, and her ally, Julia Sokolowski. I think this is such a unique relationship because it forms on day one. Um, what's unique about this duo compared to so many other ones we've seen, Michelle, knowing that it's what she has to do, votes Julia out of the game.
Mm-hmm.
Julia heads to Ponderosa, comes back for final tribal council, and while admitting that she was hurt by that move, tells Michelle, I was proud of you. She
Yeah.
goes on to campaign. Great speech where Julia, at this point, 19 years old, goes to campaign for one of her, well, her best friend in the game to get that title of Soul Survivor. And really, you can see how, especially for a teenager playing the game, how mature Julia is as a player to respect Michelle's move, to still uh campaign for her to win. And then, like, when Michelle had a job in Boston, they moved in together.
Yeah. And like Julia here is the definition of respecting gameplay. Like zero bitterness from her as a juror there at all, compared to some other
Yeah.
people you see that get blindsided and then hold it against the person and take it personally. So really loved seeing that from Julia when I watched Co Wrong. And
Absolutely. And go ahead with your number one.
so we talked about this is one of the best duos in my mind, if no for no other reason because I mean, we talked about Tony and Sarah and Colby and Jerry that were both on 3 seasons together. But this is and I think it's those two and this pair, the only three that have that notion of being on 3 seasons together. Maybe I'm wrong. But Tony and Sarah never even saw each other in Game Changers. Colby and Jerry were at odds their first 2 seasons. And I mean, weren't super close on their third season, but neither one of them liked Russell. So they had that to bond over. But this duo is Amanda and James, and it's the only one that was they were truly united together as a tight duo across all 3 seasons they played together. And you see how close their bond is. In Micronesia, after the Aussie boot, when Amanda's feeling blindsided and hurt by her friends, by the Girls Alliance, James is who she goes and talks to and vents to. And then in Heroes versus Villains, when he's hurt and you don't know if he's coming back or not, you see this confessional where she's talking about and she's almost on the brink of tears because she just cares for this guy so much.
I was gonna say that.
One of my favorite Survivor pictures is a picture of them from Micronesia, which will probably go out on one of our socials at some point after this releases. You probably know what picture I'm talking about, but just such a great duo. The way, and neither one of them won, but just they played well together. You can tell both of them really cared for the other one. So, Amanda and James.
Yeah, great way to wrap that up. I agree. Such a powerful moment there in Heroes versus Villains with Amanda's just human emotion coming out as a result of James's injury. So let's play Ally Blindside First Boot before we wrap up.
Yep.
Do you want to go first?
Yep. And just so the audience knows, we're putting a bit of a spin on it this time. Since this is a duos themed episode, instead of naming 3 names, we're naming 3 duos, 3 pairs. So,
who you would want to be in an alliance with, get rid of early, and have on the jury.
yep. So, my 3 pairs for you. Honestly, I went with 3 heavy hitters just to see how you react when the game is hard. JT and Steven, Parv and Amanda, and then Rob and Amber. I just went with 3 of the most dominant that have done it. There's not a good option to go to the end with.
Great picks. I know the audience is going to call me dumb for this, but I will start by saying I will ally with Robin. Oh, sorry, with Pov and Amanda. The reason I'm gonna say that is because for those of you who didn't see a kind of introduction, took the online course Win Beyond the Game. So I have a little bit of a pre-existing relationship with Parvati as one
Yeah.
of her students that could help me out in this case. I am gonna ally with JT and blindside JT and Steven. I think they'd respect the move and players I could work with. I'm gonna blindside Rob and Amber. I mean, they're married, and we've seen how bitter Rob can get when he gets voted out.
Yeah.
So pretty good decisions there.
Well, and you're just not going to break those two up. Why Jenna Lewis voted with them at 4 and All Stars instead of at least trying to force a tie and break something up? I don't know. I mean, I wasn't there, but
So
there's no way she was going to break the two of them up.
so we're almost done. I'll give you mine. Let's go with one name you picked, so I have to kind of rejig it in my mind, but that's okay. The duos I'm going to give you are also some at least a few heavy hitters in there. Wendell and Dominic.
Hmm.
Um, we mentioned Island of the Idols. I'm going to give you Tommy and Lauren Beck.
Hmm.
And I'm going to give you, going back old school, like we talked about, Ethan Zahn and Big Tom.
Oh, cool. Ethan and Big Tom. I was not expecting that. I heard Ethan and thought you were going to go Lex on that one. And I wouldn't have known how to handle that because playing with Lex seems like it'd be exhausting. But I have to align with Wendell and Dom because Ghost Island is the first season I ever watched live. That's the season my mom convinced me to try watching this show with her. And
Nice.
honestly, they're both incredible players. Dominic got as close as anyone's ever gotten to winning without winning. Wendell won because he had a better relationship with Dom than with one person. I mean, I'm pretty good socially. I make friends easily. If it comes down to that again, I feel like I have a good shot. So the other two, it was Ethan and Big Tom, and who was the third one?
Lauren Beck and Tommy
That's
Sheehan.
right. So we'll blindside Ethan and Tom, and then first boot Lauren and Tommy.
Excellent. Well, that was a great episode, great topic. Looking forward to expanding on it in the future. But let's wrap this up, grab your torches, and go back to camp.
Goodbye, guys.